I never thought inheriting a cabin would make me afraid of silence. When my uncle passed away, he left me a small cabin near a lake in northern Wisconsin. It wasn't anything special, just a simple one-story place surrounded by woods. My wife loved how quiet it was, and our two daughters looked forward to spending a few weekends there every summer. The first few trips were completely normal. Then, during our fourth visit, everything changed. It was almost midnight. My wife had fallen asleep on the couch after we watched a movie. I stayed in the kitchen for a few more minutes cleaning up. That's when my younger daughter walked into the hallway, rubbing her eyes. She looked at me and quietly asked why someone was knocking under her bed. I smiled and told her she probably had a bad dream. I walked her back to her room and looked under the bed. There were only a couple of storage bins and some dust, nothing else. I tucked her back in. As I turned to leave, I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not on the floor, from underneath it. The cabin sat on raised supports with a crawl space underneath, so I figured it had to be some kind of animal. I knelt down and pressed my ear against the floor. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, everything was completely quiet. Then I heard breathing, slow, steady, human. I jumped back so fast I almost hit the dresser. Before I could even react, an ear-piercing scream exploded from beneath the floorboards. The whole room seemed to shake. I grabbed my daughter and ran into the hallway, yelling for my wife. She came running out, carrying our older daughter while I called 911. We were almost at the front door when a section of the floor inside my daughter's closet suddenly lifted from below. A dirty hand pushed it open. Then a man climbed out. He looked like someone who had been living outside for a long time. He was thin, filthy, and wearing old clothes covered in dirt. The look in his eyes scared me more than anything else. He looked terrified and completely unstable at the same time. The second he saw us, he charged. We made it outside and locked ourselves inside the SUV. A few seconds later, he came out the front door. He started pounding on the windows, screaming at us, pulling on the door handles, and circling the vehicle. My daughters were crying in the back seat while we waited for the deputies to arrive. I honestly thought the glass would break before they got there. When the deputies finally pulled into the driveway, the man didn't even try to run. He just stood there looking back at the cabin like it belonged to him. They arrested him without much of a fight. Over the next few days, investigators searched the property. None of us knew there was a narrow tunnel hidden behind an old woodshed. It led into a crawl space beneath the cabin. From there, someone had cut a hidden opening into my daughter's closet years earlier and covered it with a piece of plywood that blended perfectly with the floor. The detective later told me the man had been living under the cabin since late winter. He survived by collecting rainwater, digging through trash, and sneaking into the cabin whenever we were gone. He stole food from our pantry and refrigerator. Looking back, there were a few times we thought groceries had disappeared faster than they should have. We always assumed we had forgotten what we bought. The worst part came after they questioned him. He admitted he always knew when we came back. Every night, he listened to us from beneath the floor. Over time, he started believing the cabin belonged to him. Every time we showed up, he became more angry. In his mind, we were the ones invading his home. When my little daughter heard the knocking under her bed, He became convinced she had discovered where he was hiding. He believed we were about to force him out for good. That's why he came out. We sold the cabin the following spring. I still think about how many nights we slept just a few feet above a man who had already decided that our home was his. I used to think people exaggerated how dangerous backcountry camping could be. Then my brother talked me into spending a long weekend in a state forest in northern Arkansas with 3 of his friends. It was early fall. The days were still warm, but the nights were cold enough that we kept the campfire burning until we went to bed. We hiked a few miles from the nearest trailhead and found an old clearing beside a dry creek. It looked like someone had camped there years before. There was a broken stone fire ring and a couple of rusty food cans half buried in the dirt. Nothing about the place felt strange. The first night was completely quiet. The next day, little things started happening that didn't make sense. One of our folding chairs had been moved closer to the woods. The cooler we had left beside a log was suddenly sitting several feet away. We blamed each other, assuming someone had forgotten where they left it. That evening, while I was collecting firewood, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like someone standing between the trees. I stared for a few seconds, but the figure slowly disappeared behind the trunks. I figured it was just another camper. After dark, we heard footsteps somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight. They never came closer. Someone was simply walking around our campsite. Every time we pointed a flashlight toward the woods, the footsteps stopped. Around midnight, we convinced ourselves we were just getting into our own heads and finally went to bed. I woke up just before sunrise because something brushed against the side of my tent. At first, I thought it was a branch. Then, I heard slow, heavy breathing. Not an animal. A person. Whoever it was stood so close that I could hear every breath. I held mine, hoping they would think nobody was inside. After a while, the footsteps slowly faded away. The next morning, I found footprints all around our campsite. Most of them were hiking boots, but one set was different. Bare human footprints. They came within inches of every tent before disappearing back into the woods. None of us admitted getting much sleep that night. We talked about leaving immediately, but it was almost a 3-hour hike back to the parking lot, and nobody wanted to hike unfamiliar trails after dark. We decided to stay one more night and leave at sunrise. That evening, we kept the fire burning much later than usual. Around 1 in the morning, a whistle came from the woods. It wasn't a bird. It sounded like someone trying to imitate one. A few seconds later, another whistle answered from the opposite side of the campsite. Then another one, this time from somewhere behind us. We looked at each other. Nobody was laughing anymore. It felt like someone was slowly circling us. My brother swept his flashlight across the trees. Nothing, just tree trunks and bushes. Then a branch snapped loudly off to our right. We all turned toward the sound. A second later, another crack came from the opposite direction. It felt like several people were intentionally making us look in different directions. One of us suggested we stay by the fire, so we did. We sat there for nearly 2 more hours. Eventually, the fire started dying down. We didn't really have a choice. We went back to our tents, even though none of us wanted to. I don't know how much time passed before I heard footsteps outside my tent again. Then someone grabbed the zipper. It moved an inch, then another, slowly, carefully. like whoever was outside was trying not to make a sound. I screamed as loud as I could. The whole campsite exploded with shouting. I heard several people running through the woods at the same time. Not one person, several. None of us slept again. We packed before sunrise and practically ran back to the parking lot. At the ranger station, we told them everything. The ranger didn't look surprised. He asked us one question. "Did any of you actually get a good look at them?" We all shook our heads. He let out a long sigh. Then he told us they had been getting reports like ours for years. According to him, there was a group of people living deep in those woods who avoided all contact with the outside world. Nobody knew exactly how many there were. Sometimes they only stole food or camping gear. Other times, they watched campers for days before anyone realized they weren't alone. He didn't say anything else. I've never gone camping again. Knowing someone stood just inches away from me and slowly unzipped my tent while I was lying inside was enough to ruin it forever. I took a night shift job at a distribution warehouse outside Kansas City because it paid better than anything else I could find. The work was simple: build pallets, prepare shipments, and fill out shipping paperwork. Most people came in, did their job, and went home without saying much. My first 2 nights were completely normal. The third night was different. I finished building a pallet and walked away to grab another roll of stretch wrap. I was gone for less than a minute. When I came back, the entire pallet had already been wrapped perfectly. It looked like someone with years of experience had done it. I assumed one of the other workers had helped me. The next night, it happened again. Then it happened again after that. Sometimes boxes I hadn't moved yet were already stacked where they belonged. Sometimes paperwork I hadn't even started was sitting on my desk, completely filled out. Whenever I asked if someone had been helping me, nobody knew what I was talking about. At first, I convinced myself I just wasn't paying enough attention. But after several nights, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was working beside me. I started testing it. I would leave paperwork unfinished, walk away for a minute, and then come back. Every time, it was completed. One morning, near the end of my shift, I picked up one of the shipping forms that I knew I hadn't filled out. At the bottom was a signature, completed by Linda Harper. I had never met anyone by that name. Before going home, I showed the form to one of the senior employees and asked if he knew who Linda Harper was. He looked at the paperwork for a long time before answering. He finally told me Linda had worked there years ago. She was killed during a night shift when a trailer pinned her against the loading dock. Then he looked at the signature one more time and quietly said it looked exactly like her handwriting. Up until then, I had been trying to find a reasonable explanation for everything. But the truth was that I had already been on edge for days. Someone kept finishing my work. Paperwork I never touched kept showing up completed. Pallets were wrapped before I got back. I never actually saw anyone. Still, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wasn't alone in that warehouse. Finding Linda's name on that paperwork was the last straw. Before my next shift, I emptied my locker, left my badge on my supervisor's desk, and quit. The next day, I called Human Resources to ask about my final paycheck. Instead, they told me they had no record of my resignation. Then the woman on the phone said something that made my stomach drop. According to their system, I had worked my entire shift the previous night. Several shipping forms had also been completed using my employee ID. I didn't argue, I just hung up. About a month later, one of my former coworkers called and asked if we could meet when we sat down at a small diner near the warehouse. He quietly slid a shipping form across the table. The date on it was from the day before. Everything had been filled out correctly. At the bottom was a signature. Completed by Ethan Brooks. My name, my signature. I stared at it for several seconds before finally saying that it was impossible. He nodded. Then he quietly told me that was exactly why he wanted me to see it. No one at the warehouse had been able to explain how that paperwork appeared, and as far as he knew, no one was trying to anymore.